I would now want to get into when we first talked, you were talking about the autonomy that a submarine has that nobody else in the military has, and that you could go a month without speaking to the outside world potentially.
Mhm.
Could you talk about when you talk about this unrestricted autonomy compared to other people in the military?
Mhm.
Explain to the audience kind of what that means and why it works that way.
Yeah, so one of the loneliest jobs in the world is command at sea. So basically being captain of a ship. You think the deepest, what is it, whatever the fishing show is, anyone who's been a captain of a ship, everything's the buck stops with that person. There's no one else to look to in the seafaring world when the shit hits the fan, basically. And so, everyone looks to the captain. So the captain is, usually things are running fine and everything works, and the captain can be a benevolent monarch. But when the shit hits the fan, everyone turns to the one guy to make or gal to make the decision. And so being the captain of ship's one thing. But I would say what makes a submarine captain even more lucrative of a job, and the reason I chose to stay in the Navy and go command submarines is because, I get to do things in autonomy. The nation has placed trust in me and other folks who've, had the privilege of being a captain of a submarine at sea, you know, to basically go periods of time without communicating with their boss. They're just given intent and commander's intent and orders. We go out, we execute those orders, and we don't report because we're given tremendous amount of discretion. And then we come home and we then fill out all our paperwork and tell the world, our bosses, what we did, and we move on. And there's not many jobs on Earth. I'm pretty sure there's only a handful, and nuclear submarine captain happens to be one of them in the United States, where a captain of a submarine is given tremendous authority and accountability that comes with it, and to do their job without being riddled with communications. And that attracted me very much to my job because with the trust comes a tremendous accountability, but if you're not up for that game, then don't sign up for it. That's what I tell people. I like being able to operate autonomously, given direction, give me intent, trust me and my crew to do our jobs. My job, when I was a captain of a submarine, I was 100% responsible from bow to stern, everyone on board, for their training, well-being, and combat readiness. And I liked having that responsibility and accountability. So that's something that I think if you talk to anybody else that did that job, they would probably tell you the same thing. That's one of the perks of the job. And it's not like you're getting emailed. So if you work in an office or something, you always have a manager or somebody coming and asking you how things are going. Yeah, you don't always have that in a submarine because you're underwater and you can't communicate with folks on shore.
And I have two questions on that point about
Yeah.
not being able to communicate with people on shore. First off, I
Hmm.
want to take this back to when the pandemic started in
Hmm.
2020. In
Hmm.
theory, would it have been possible that we would have had submarines that were kind of in that dark zone that had no idea what was going up on the surface, the country shutting
Yeah.
down and all that stuff? Could something like that occur?
Nah, probably not. And the thing is, we can on a submarine I can't speak for any other submarine force, but on a U.S. submarine when we're at sea, we still get messages and traffic sent to us, so we can copy and bring in information. We choose consciously not to transmit because that gives up our
Gotcha.
stealth, right? So we get ideas. The captain of a submarine, he or she, they get information on what's going on around the world because that helps formulate, that's the other thing, right? If the nation's going to trust, knuckleheads like me to go do this, they also owe it to us to let us know what the geopolitical situation is, what's going on. So, when we're tasked to do things on behalf of the nation, we as commanders with autonomy can frame the solution correctly. So for example, if I'm going to get tasked to launch, Tomahawk cruise missiles at somebody, it's nice to understand the geopolitical context under which we're doing it. There's not a commander out there that's not going to get told, why we're doing that. Because I need to understand that as a commander, so I understand. Because as a commissioned officer, I was responsible for upholding the law. That's the oath I took. And so part of it is I need to understand, why we're doing what we're doing. And that's the beauty of being in America, in our free society. That's, our military personnel are given tremendous responsibility and authority and autonomy to make those decisions. And so that culture is already there. It's good having that. And yeah.
And then this will lead me to my second question about kind of the autonomy and being not speaking to people for extended periods of time.
Yeah.
But your regular soldier, he gets a card that says rules of engagement when he deploys to Iraq. It says,
Hmm.
here's what you can do, here's what you can't do. If
Hmm.
you're in the middle of the ocean and a Chinese submarine or a Russian submarine maybe is posing as a threat, you start to think as the
Hmm.
commander of the sub, we might have a problem.
Hmm.
Is it your call to engage, or do you have to wait on someone back in the U.S. to
Hmm.
tell you to engage?
Yeah, so, as a not to go too far into this, but all commanders in the absence. So when you talked about ROE cards specifically for soldiers in Iraq, for example, those are issued during combat operations. So I want to distinguish between non-combat operation and combat operation. So if we're actually engaged in a government sanctioned offensive operation, I'll just use that as an example. There will be specific rules of engagement for all our forces. And it varies with time. It changes often depending on, a lot of factors. But if you're just out, let's say it's the years, 2005, you're in the middle of, or 1995, you're in the middle of the ocean, we have a default set of rules of engagement. For example, you know, you can't just go out and, go get your face punched and not punch back. We'll
Right.
just say hypothetically, right? So we're given some standing rules of engagement for all U.S. forces. And I would say every nation has, some sort of standing rules of engagement. Their commanders are always, given something. That's of course is the $1 million question is, when you're out operating out in, the middle of nowhere and you're operating like, for example, in the Gulf, there's ships, there's all kinds of foreign warships all over the Gulf because there are many nations that have civilian vessels that go through and traffic, through that part of the world. So that I would say most industrialized nations deploy their navies to that part of the world to show protection for their interests, if that makes sense. And so they have rules too. Of course, the mystery is what are their rules? And so when you're operating in a complex space with a bunch of other actors, do you know their rules? Do they know our rules? And that's as far as I'll go into it. We always have some kind of rules of engagement.
When we talked, we also talked